Hello. I would love to share with you all our story today, but first I need to give you a little background on myself and how I came to roll out on the stage instead of walk. I grew up in a very typical suburban neighborhood as a very typical kind of kid who really didn't have to struggle for too much. I started on all the athletic teams I played for and got good grades despite barely studying. Most of my time was spent chasing girls, which, for better or worse, could have been more of a challenge too. So quite frankly, I had a pretty adversity-free upbringing. All of that changed on a summer day in 2011. I was supposed to help my mom on a business trip of hers, but that morning instead asked, "Hey Mom, my friends just invited me to the river and I would love to go, would that be all right?" And she said, "Yeah, that's fine, but don't a lot of people get hurt down by where you're going?" I said, "Yes, but Mom, come on. I was a competitive swimmer for years, basically grew up in the water, I'm gonna be fine, don't worry." And she said, "Okay," skeptically, and I went to the river with my friends. We were at a place called the Pipeline, which is a relatively isolated stretch of the river, which has rocks exposed that people can use to sunbathe on or get in and out of the water where the rapids aren't too strong. After a long day of swimming, we were crossing the river back to our little campsite. Because I was a strong swimmer, I didn't think much of it, though I did choose to dive because the water through the stretch flowed pretty quickly, and there was another set of rapids just 15 yards or so downstream. As soon as I broke the surface of the water, my head hit a rock lurking just below where the sunlight could reach. The impact reminded me of when I played football as a linebacker, and I would hit somebody straight on, head to head, boom, and there'd be a flash of white as I recovered from the shock. Unlike back in football, however, this collision immediately broke my neck at the C5 and C6 vertebrae, instantly rendering me quadriplegic. In a moment, I lost all ability to use my hands, my arms, my legs, my trunk, basically everything. But I didn't know that. My first thought when I came to my senses was of the rapids probably now just 10 yards away. And never mind the electric numbness that I felt all over my body and the sudden extraordinary pain that was now radiating from my neck. I started stroking my arms and kicking as hard as I could, putting everything I had into getting across the river. Or so I thought. In reality, nothing was moving. I opened my eyes in the murky water to near complete darkness, and I saw someone's arms being jostled about lifelessly by the water. After a few moments, I realized they were my arms, and around them grew a cloud of red, dark red, and it was coming from my head, and I didn't know what was happening. Instinctually, I held on to my breath as long as I could, though. But most of my air had been taken by the rock, and what air I had left wasn't going to make a difference once I was swallowed by the oncoming rapids. Suddenly, hands pulled me roughly above the water and flipped me over so that my back was on someone's chest. It was my friend who had been straggling behind on the way to the campsite. He put his arms under my armpits and towed me, now mere yards away from the rapids, back to the side of the river from whence I dove. I remember laying there in terrible agony. It felt like someone was driving daggers into my shoulders. I had no idea that with most of my body now numb and paralyzed, what I could still feel was now hugely amplified. About 45 minutes later, the paramedics arrived, and they immediately started asking me this question. "Do you feel this?" "No." "Do you feel this?" "No." "How about this?" "No." I cared more about the phone conversation my friend was having with my mom behind me, his knees against his chest, rocking back and forth. And I pled with him over and over to tell her how sorry I was and that I loved her. Despite everything, I knew I should have listened to her that morning. I fell asleep on the riverside in pain, and I woke up in a hospital room with more pain. But now looking up into bright fluorescent lights and hearing the soft drip, drip of blood hitting the floor. And soon after waking, I had a tube placed down my throat, as I was slowly losing the ability to breathe out of my own power. As a young kid, 16 years old, in peak physical health, the most natural of human abilities was lost to me. I couldn't move anything, quite literally trapped within my own body. What exactly it meant to be paralyzed, I had no idea. But imagining a life bereft of the activities I loved was too much for my adversity-free spirit to handle. Quickly, I descended into a terribly dark mental space, leading me to ask my own brother to do the unspeakable. On an alphabet board, I spelled out to him letter by letter, K-I-L-L-M-E. I think I only got to the first L before he said, no, I'm not doing that, and just walked away, as a good brother would do. I went through several days of despairing before finally I reached a breaking point and allowed myself to consider some of the positives within this terrible situation. I was alive, I had no brain damage, and I was surrounded by an amazing support system ready and able to lend me their strength when, for the first time, I had none of my own. Because of what my upbringing had instilled in me, a mentality of always making the best of whatever hand you're dealt, I was able to take those positives and flip a switch mentally from feeling defeated and lost to preparing myself for a fight. Just because I hadn't faced a struggle like this before did not mean it was going to be too much for me to handle. When I finally returned home after 122 days of intense rehab, I made it my mission to recreate the struggle-free life I led before my injury. And for the most part, I did. The one thing I couldn't seem to regain any semblance of was my confidence when it came to dating. As a young man who had fixed so much of his identity into his physicality, when my able body was taken from me, I felt like I had lost who I was. Without a strong sense of identity, confidence can be a very slippery trait to come by. And so I didn't make much effort again when it came to chasing girls. I simply had no confidence. Foolishly, I clung to the notion that I was the same typical guy I was before, and that it was my wheelchair, my disability that was keeping girls away. And by carrying that mindset with me through high school and college, I could count the number of dates I went on one hand. That's supposed to be a 5. It was when I grew up that I finally realized I had it all backwards. I needed to embrace my disability, embrace everything that made me different as opposed to the same guy I was, before I finally had the confidence to start dating again, put myself out there. And eventually, I did, and it worked. Everyone, this is my incredible fiance, Charisma.
It's interesting for me to hear Cole talk about a time where he had little confidence, because that's a side of him I've never seen. From our very first interaction, when he asked him if he had a date to a gala we were attending, and he said, "No, I don't." Super flirty. I thought this was a guy who oozed confidence, and I was drawn to him. So after a gala filled with flirtatious undertones and impassioned eye contact, when Cole made that late night slide into my DMs 2 years ago today, I didn't hesitate to give him my number and agreed to a date. Since I had already spent a year working hands-on at Sheltering Arms as a rehab tech, it had become easy for me to see past someone's condition and instead come to know them for who they are as a person. Now, that isn't to say I didn't consider his being in a wheelchair at all, though. I did. I even went to family and friends and asked them if they would date someone in a wheelchair. Some bluntly said, no, I wouldn't. But most everyone said, as long as they're a good person, the wheelchair shouldn't matter. I knew I was in trouble when after our first date, I immediately got on Pinterest and searched wheelchair weddings. I know, but we just clicked, laughed, and really enjoyed each other's company. Deep down, I could feel we had a future together.
And I could feel it too, though I must say, I was pretty surprised when after a few months she told me about the wedding pictures. I thought the date went well, but not that well. Truly, I was so nervous that the help I needed, like getting my special fork out of my bag, cutting up my steak for me, and even getting my card out of my wallet so I could pay, all would have been a turnoff. Obviously, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. What was most important to me was our chemistry, and there was no denying we had it. But seeing the help he did need made me think about our future and how those limitations may affect and possibly strain our relationship. Thoughts began to cloud my mind like, would he need me around him all the time? Would he be able to hold a job and support our family? And what about changing our baby's diapers? And when the time eventually came, when I got sick and I needed help, would he be able to take care of me? Those are all important questions for any relationship. But at the beginning, with Cole, I found myself dwelling on them too often, sometimes overwhelming me to a point where I began to question if I can handle all of this in a relationship. In my head, I couldn't help but imagine Cole's disability as a roadblock preventing us from having a normal relationship. I assumed, as many do, that Cole's disability would be the hardest part of our relationship. In hindsight, I was way off.
And I was too, because I thought the same thing. I was so certain that all the help I needed would ultimately strain our relationship to a breaking point and I would lose this amazing woman. I even waited for months to teach her how to help me relieve myself because I was so scared it would send her running. I'm not proud of it, but I had built up my own disability as a potential relationship killer every bit as much as she.
What we've learned after 2 years together is that our relationship isn't so different from anyone else's. We argue and have disagreements like everyone else.
No, we don't.
There are other things, but when it comes down to it, we're crazy about each other. We love going to the movies, driving around just to drive. We honestly can't be apart from each other. So what's the hardest part of our relationship, you may ask? Communication.
Communication.
Yes, despite all the added challenges presented by Cole's quadriplegia, the hardest part of our relationship is something so normal that most of you in this room can likely relate. Now, that isn't to say we don't face challenges due to Cole's quadriplegia. Of course we do. There isn't a day we don't face accessibility challenges, and sometimes we'll have to scrap carefully laid plans in a moment due to some unforeseen issue. But those challenges, while annoying at the time, always pass, and in the end we end up stronger having faced them together. The physical elements of our relationship we learned quickly, and they became easy. The harder part was learning each other through communication. Which love languages do we employ to best express ourselves? As an interracial couple, how can we best fuse our different abilities to become the strongest unit possible? And lastly, simply supporting each other emotionally in all things. We're still learning all of that, and will undoubtedly continue to learn for the rest of our lives. Fortunately, there is no rush. Before Cole, I was focused on myself, my career, and finding someone I could start a family with. I was resistant of change, thinking I would lose who I self and who I strive to be. But our relationship has opened my eyes. I see our relationship as one of the most beautiful and critical parts of both who I am and who I will become. With patience and openness, I have learned that change can be seen simply as an opportunity, and with the right approach can lead to a richer and more vibrant you.
Not only has the way the world sees us changed, but how we identify has changed too. In the beginning, I wanted nothing more than to be normal, to conform, believing that the more I fit in, the better I would feel about myself. After years of struggling to be the guy I was, someone I could never be again, I finally realized that feeling good about yourself has nothing to do with conformity and everything to do with acceptance. By embracing my ability, I've been able to forge a new identity of which I'm immensely proud, an identity that allows me, from a wheelchair, to stand out in a crowd.
It took us facing adversity head on for us to realize that what we're able to do today has little bearing on what we're capable of tomorrow. So, we want to leave you all with a question. How does your ability define your identity? And if you're not happy with that answer, how can you flip the switch on ability and become the person you hope to be?
Thank
Thank
you.
you.